dive into the astonishing saga of the Persian Empire, from the rise of Cyrus the Great to the grand courts of Darius and the cataclysmic battles with Greece, all the way to the empire's fall and lasting legacy. In this epic 40-minute journey, you'll discover the hidden secrets, political intrigue, engineering marvels, and cultural achievements that made Persia one of history's greatest powers. Expect conspiracy, rebellion, betrayal, innovation, and empire building on a scale that shook the ancient world. If you love deep dives into ancient civilizations, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter in humanity's story. You think of Persia, and images of lion-headed columns or sweeping palaces come to mind. But what if I told you that before the glory, there was a world of scattered tribes, shifting alliances, and a single spark that would fuse them into one of history's greatest empires? What hidden forces made this land fertile for empire building? And how did Persia, a relatively obscure tribe, rise to eclipse the ancient world's most powerful kingdoms? Long before the name Persia struck awe across continents, the Iranian plateau was a chaotic patchwork of civilizations. To the west were the Elamites, an ancient people with deep Mesopotamian ties. To the north, the Medes, fierce warriors forging a new power base in the Zagros Mountains. Between them were scattered Indo-Iranian tribes migrating into the region, including a small group known as the Parsa, or Persians. They had little in the way of land or resources, but they had an unmatched hunger for change. The Elamites had cities and kings, and the Medes had armies. The Persians, they had ambition. In the 7th century BCE, the Medes rose to regional dominance and subdued their Persian neighbors, absorbing them into a loose confederation. For a time, the Persians were quiet vassals until the system began to wobble. The last Median king, Astyages, grew increasingly autocratic, and his court was rife with internal dissent. In the midst of this unraveling tapestry, a new figure emerged: Cyrus II, the young Persian ruler whose legacy would shake the foundations of the ancient world. Cyrus wasn't born into absolute power, he seized it. Around 550 BCE, he led a rebellion against his Median overlords. In a masterstroke of military and political genius, he defeated Astyages and took control of both Median and Persian territories. But he didn't destroy what came before. He co-opted it. By merging the two cultures, he gained the loyalty of both peoples, expanding his base without alienating either. That move, strategic fusion rather than annihilation, would become a cornerstone of Persian rule. With his power base secure, Cyrus launched a breathtaking campaign of conquests. First, he toppled the rich and powerful kingdom of Lydia, home of the legendary Croesus. Then came the stunning capture of Babylon in 539 BCE, one of the most sophisticated cities in the world, which Cyrus took with minimal resistance. His entry was not as a conqueror but as a liberator. The Cyrus cylinder, discovered centuries later, paints him as a divine agent restoring temples, freeing captives, and respecting local traditions. Whether propaganda or truth, it worked. Cyrus was revered not just as a king, but as a just ruler, chosen by the gods. But military success was only half the story. What truly set Cyrus apart was his revolutionary approach to governance. He didn't impose Persian culture on his subjects. Instead, he allowed local customs, languages, and religions to thrive, as long as loyalty to the empire was upheld. It was a model that reduced rebellions and fostered stability across a sprawling, diverse territory. Cyrus understood that an empire built on fear would crumble, but one built on tolerance could endure. This genius system would become the Persian signature, refined further by his successors. As Cyrus's empire expanded, So too did the infrastructure needed to hold it together. Trade routes were protected, messaging systems established, and loyal regional governors appointed, the embryonic form of what would become the imperial machine. And although Cyrus would die in battle in 530 BCE, his dream didn't die with him. He had transformed a minor tribal kingdom into the greatest empire the world had seen, stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Hindu Kush. But the real challenge had just begun. In the next section, we meet Darius I, the mastermind who built the scaffolding that held this empire aloft, a ruler who would turn Cyrus's conquest into a finely tuned civilization. Cyrus the Great wasn't just a conqueror, he was a visionary, and unlike many rulers before him, his wars weren't fueled purely by plunder or revenge. They were calculated expansions, each conquest forming a strategic piece in a grand puzzle. He wasn't building an empire for a season. He was engineering a system that could outlive him, a superpower rooted in order, adaptability, and respect. After defeating the Medes and consolidating his rule, Cyrus turned west. His eyes were on the kingdom of Lydia, where Croesus, one of the wealthiest men in the ancient world, ruled over a powerful realm flush with gold and Greek mercenaries. Cyrus's campaign was bold, swift, and surprisingly decisive. Croesus, expecting reinforcements from Greek allies, found none. In a shocking reversal, Cyrus captured Sardis, the Lydian capital, and with it, Croesus himself, who, according to legend, became an unlikely advisor rather than a prisoner. This conquest not only expanded Persian borders, but also gave Cyrus access to the Ionian Greek cities, beginning the complex relationship between Persia and the Hellenic world. With the West secured, Cyrus's next move was audacious: Babylon. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was a behemoth, ancient, wealthy, and heavily fortified. But internal unrest had weakened the state. Cyrus capitalized on dissent within, presenting himself as a liberator rather than an invader. When he marched into Babylon in 539 BCE, it wasn't through siege, but with open gates. The city's priests, unhappy with their own king Nabonidus, welcomed Cyrus as a restorer of tradition. And once inside, Cyrus didn't loot or destroy. He ordered temples rebuilt, exiles freed, including famously the Jews exiled by the Babylonians. This moment would echo through time, earning Cyrus praise in the Hebrew Bible itself. Cyrus didn't stop. His empire soon stretched eastward to Central Asia and into parts of modern-day Pakistan. His reach extended from the Aegean to the Indus, and all without the brutality commonly associated with conquest. The key: he governed with flexibility. Instead of forcing Persian customs on his subjects, he respected their traditions, religions, and political structures. Local kings often kept their titles but now ruled under Persian sovereignty. Tribute flowed in, but revolts were rare. In a world of emperors obsessed with control, Cyrus mastered the art of balance, and all of this was held together by an ideology that Cyrus was chosen by the divine. The gods of conquered lands, from Marduk in Babylon to Ahura Mazda in Persia, were invoked to legitimize his rule. This wasn't just spiritual PR, it was a masterstroke of unification. Different cultures could find a reflection of their beliefs in Cyrus's reign. The empire wasn't a monolith, it was a mosaic held together by shared interest and mutual benefit. Yet, for all his brilliance, Cyrus was not immortal. In 530 BCE, while on a campaign against nomadic tribes in Central Asia, Cyrus died in battle. His tomb, found at Pasargadae, is simple, a stark contrast to his legacy, but the foundations he laid were unshakable. His successors wouldn't just inherit territory, they'd inherit an idea that empires could be ruled not just by force but by trust, by innovation, and by respect. His son Cambyses would expand it briefly, but it was Darius the First, the distant relative who seized power after a succession crisis, who would build what Cyrus dreamed of, a unified empire with the most advanced system of governance the ancient world had ever seen. And that's where we go next, to the rise of Darius the Organizer, the one who made Persia more than a military juggernaut. He made it a machine. If Cyrus laid the foundations of the Persian Empire, Darius the First was the one who poured the concrete, carved the laws, and built the scaffolding that held it together for centuries. When he came to power in 522 BCE, through a swift and somewhat bloody power grab after Cambyses' mysterious death, Darius inherited a vast, fragile empire. Rebellions simmered, borders stretched thin, and legitimacy was in question. But in the chaos, Darius saw clarity, and from that he built the most advanced imperial system the world had seen. His first act of brilliance wasn't military, it was propaganda. To solidify his rule, Darius created a narrative. According to the Behistun inscription, a monumental trilingual carving on a mountainside, Darius was chosen by the supreme god Ahura Mazda to restore order and punish the liars who claimed the throne. The story was etched high above in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, 3 languages, 1 message. Darius is king and divine will is with him. It wasn't just a declaration, it was branding. The empire's story now had a God-ordained architect. Then came the real innovation: administration. Governing millions of people across 3 continents required more than charisma. Darius divided the empire into 20 satrapies or provinces, each overseen by a satrap, essentially a governor. These satraps had significant autonomy but were closely monitored by royal inspectors, famously called the king's eyes and ears. Taxes were standardized, tributes recorded, and military service formalized. Corruption was punished harshly. This wasn't just decentralization. It was controlled delegation, a balance between regional flexibility and imperial authority. Infrastructure followed. Darius didn't just want to hold the empire. He wanted it connected. The royal road, stretching over 1,600 miles from Susa to Sardis, was a marvel of engineering. Along it, mounted couriers could relay messages in under a week, a feat unmatched in the ancient world. Bridges, tunnels, and canals were constructed. Trade flourished. Ideas moved fast. The empire didn't just conquer space, it conquered time. But Darius wasn't only a bureaucrat. He was also a builder of symbols. At Persepolis, he raised a city unlike any other, a ceremonial capital carved from the mountains, filled with soaring columns, exquisite reliefs, and tributes from across the empire. Each visitor was reminded, this is not just Persia, this is the world, united under one king. Art and architecture became tools of governance. Loyalty was inspired not by fear alone, but by awe. And he didn't forget the spiritual. While Zoroastrianism wasn't yet a fully codified religion, Darius embraced its principles. The struggle between truth and lie, order and chaos, these weren't just religious ideas, they were political tools. By aligning himself with Asha, truth, and branding his enemies as followers of Druge, the lie, Darius turned theology into a state doctrine. His rule wasn't just legal, it was moral. Yet beneath the glory, the system carried tension. The satraps, powerful as they were, could one day grow too strong. Ethnic divisions persisted, and far to the west, in the Greek world, Darius's reach would soon be tested by a culture that resisted absorption. But for now, the empire was humming, a machine of astonishing precision. Under Darius, Persia wasn't just big, it was stable. And that stability gave Darius confidence, perhaps too much. In the next section, we'll follow the first real cracks in Persian dominance. as Darius faces his most stubborn enemy yet, the city-states of Greece. The Persian Empire, under Darius, was a marvel of organization, tolerance, and reach. But as its borders stretched westward, it encountered something unexpected, a force not measured in armies or gold, but in defiance. Tiny, fragmented, and quarrelsome, the Greek city-states would soon challenge the might of the world's greatest superpower. And the result? One of the most iconic clashes in world history. It all started with Ionia, the coastal region of Greek cities in Asia Minor. Though under Persian control, the Ionian Greeks bristled under satrap rule. In 499 BCE, they revolted, and while they received half-hearted support from Athens and Eretria, the rebellion was crushed. But it wasn't the military that caused trouble. It was the insult. The Greeks had dared to burn Sardis, a Persian provincial capital. For Darius, this wasn't just treason, it was personal, and he would respond not with diplomacy, but with war. In 490 BCE, Darius launched his first major campaign against mainland Greece. The target? Athens and Eretria. Eretria fell. Athens was next. But then, on the plains of Marathon, something unbelievable happened. A vastly outnumbered Athenian force, using superior tactics and terrain, defeated the Persian army. It was a stunning humiliation. Darius's aura of invincibility cracked. The empire, vast as it was, had been wounded by a sliver of resistance. This battle became the stuff of legends, and while Darius plotted revenge, fate intervened. He died before launching a second invasion. The torch passed to his son, Xerxes I, and with it came a storm. Xerxes's invasion dwarfed his father's. In 480 BCE, he amassed what ancient sources claim to be over 1 million soldiers, though modern estimates are more conservative. Still, it was a force unlike any Greece had ever seen. Bridges were built across the Hellespont, canals dug through Mount Athos. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was a performance of imperial power. Greece would kneel or it would burn. The Persian juggernaut moved south. But then came Thermopylae, a narrow pass. A handful of Greeks, led by Leonidas of Sparta, stood against overwhelming odds. For 3 days they held. Betrayed and outflanked, they fell, but not before sending a message. Resistance was possible. While the Persians marched on to sack Athens, the Greek spirit had only hardened. Then came Salamis. In the narrow straits near Athens, the Greek navy lured Xerxes's massive fleet into a trap. With agility and cunning, the Greeks destroyed ship after ship. Xerxes, watching from the shore, was forced to retreat, and with him, the Persian dream of conquering Greece collapsed. 1 year later, at Plataea, the Greeks would finish the job. These defeats didn't destroy Persia, but they shattered the illusion of its invulnerability, and more importantly, they birthed a Greek identity forged in opposition to the East. From this point forward, Persian kings would no longer be seen as benevolent rulers, but as the ultimate other in the Greek imagination. And that tension would echo all the way to Alexander. Yet, even in defeat, Persia endured. The empire didn't fall, it recalibrated, but deep inside, the seeds of discontent had been planted. In the next chapter, we turn inward to the revolts, betrayals, and civil strife that began to rot the empire from within. From the outside, the Persian Empire still looked unstoppable. Its borders remained vast, its infrastructure unmatched. But from within, cracks were forming. The clash with Greece had exposed more than just military vulnerabilities. It had revealed internal tensions that no road or satrap could fully contain. And while Persia held together for decades more, its unity was now a careful illusion, held by force, fear, and increasingly fragile loyalty. One of the empire's core strengths, its reliance on local rulers and cultures, also became its greatest weakness. Satraps, given power over vast regions, began acting more like kings than governors. Ambitious and often hereditary, they raised their own armies, collected taxes at their discretion, and, when it suited them, defied the central authority. In Egypt, Babylon, and even parts of Asia Minor, satrapal defiance grew bolder. The empire's genius for tolerance had become a double-edged sword. The problem worsened with succession. Unlike modern hereditary monarchies, Persian succession was often chaotic. No formal system existed. When a king died, the throne was a prize to be seized, not passed. Assassinations, coups, and betrayals became disturbingly common. After Xerxes' assassination in 465 BCE, a wave of court intrigue followed. His son, Artaxerxes I, would spend his reign putting out fires, including a massive revolt in Egypt, backed by Athens. Though eventually crushed, these uprisings drained resources and morale. And it wasn't just satraps. Entire ethnic groups and provinces rebelled. The Egyptians chafed under foreign rule. The Babylonians, proud of their ancient heritage, revolted repeatedly. In Bactria, Sogdiana, and the mountainous eastern frontiers, control was often theoretical. Persian armies were constantly deployed not to conquer new lands, but to hold on to what was already theirs. An empire in defense mode was no longer expanding, it was surviving. At the heart of these revolts was a growing disillusionment. The early Achaemenid rulers had governed with a reputation for justice and vision. But over time, this image faded. Taxes increased. Local grievances went unanswered. The imperial court in Persepolis became distant, luxurious, and indifferent. The symbolism of empire, the carvings, the ceremonies, the gold, began to feel hollow to the subjects outside its walls. Compounding these issues were economic pressures. War was expensive. Maintaining infrastructure across 3 continents required constant income. Droughts, poor harvests, and disrupted trade routes created instability. When people are hungry and overtaxed, loyalty becomes a commodity. And in an empire that stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, that commodity was running low. Yet Persia survived, just barely. The dynasty adapted, compromised, punished, and rewarded as needed. But the resilience of the early days had weakened. The empire was no longer the bold conqueror under Cyrus, or the master planner under Darius. It was an aging colossus, reacting more than it was acting. And in the next section, we'll witness the moment when that fatigue turned fatal. As Xerxes' successors overreached and miscalculated, pushing the empire beyond its limits. Xerxes I inherited more than just an empire. He inherited a legacy. The son of Darius the Great was raised in the heart of Persian majesty, surrounded by grandeur, protocol, and a sense of divine mission. But with that came pressure. Xerxes believed it was his destiny not only to rule, but to finish what his father had started. And so, with the full weight of the Persian state behind him, he marched toward what would become his undoing, the dream of conquering Greece. We've already seen how this ambition played out at Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. But beneath the military drama lay something deeper, an imperial overreach born of hubris. Xerxes had every reason to believe in victory. His empire dwarfed Greece in size, population, and wealth. But what he underestimated was the strain such a campaign would place on the empire itself. As his massive army and navy moved west, regions back home simmered with unease. Resources were diverted, taxes increased, and satraps left to govern with too much independence. When Xerxes returned to Persia after the failed invasion, he found himself politically weakened. Though still king, his aura had dimmed. The failure in Greece became a symbol, not just of military defeat, but of overconfidence. He withdrew into the royal court at Susa, focusing on internal matters and monumental building projects, perhaps to reclaim lost prestige. The grandeur of Persepolis expanded under his direction, but in the provinces, rebellion loomed. Xerxes' assassination in 465 BCE, likely orchestrated by a court official, marked a dramatic turning point. The empire that once looked outward now began to look inward with suspicion and fear. The successors of Xerxes faced a dilemma. Should they consolidate and reform, or continue projecting strength through military ambition? Many chose the latter, with diminishing returns. His son Artaxerxes I, and later rulers like Artaxerxes II and III, attempted to suppress revolts in Egypt and deal with renewed hostilities in Asia Minor, but each effort revealed the empire's waning agility. Victories were hard-won and often temporary. Persia was no longer setting the pace. It was struggling to keep up. Diplomatically, the empire fared no better. Former enemies now exploited Persia's troubles. Greek city-states meddled in Persian affairs, supporting rebellions or striking trade deals with restive provinces. The once feared empire had become a chessboard for foreign powers, its influence leaking away in small but critical increments. And yet, Persian kings still believed in their invincibility. The rituals continued, the tributes poured in. The royal carvings still depicted idealized subjects bowing to the king. But the reality behind the stone was different. The bureaucracy was bloated. The army was increasingly reliant on mercenaries. The central authority was stretched thin. Like an old ship patched too many times, the empire creaked beneath its own weight. Xerxes' legacy, then, is one of contrast. His reign began with unparalleled ambition, a ruler at the height of imperial power, but ended with a retreat into ceremonial splendor and internal decay. His overreach didn't just lose a war, it exposed the limits of Persian power, inviting rebellion, inviting doubt, and eventually inviting conquest. That conquest would come soon, swift, unexpected, and devastating. In the next section, we'll meet the young outsider who would bring Persia's centuries-long dominance crashing down in a matter of years: Alexander the Great. By the late 4th century BCE, the Persian Empire still stood, but it was a hollow shell of the titan it once was. The borders remained vast, the rituals elaborate, the satraps loyal in name. But the heart of the empire, its leadership, unity, and energy, had withered. The last truly powerful Achaemenid king, Artaxerxes III, had restored some order. Yet his death, followed by the brief and chaotic reign of Darius III, left the empire teetering. And into this fragile world stepped a storm, Alexander of Macedon. Alexander didn't just want victory, he wanted glory. Persia was more than a rival. It was a symbol of ancient majesty, a challenge carved in stone. And so, in 334 BCE, at just 22 years old, he crossed the Hellespont with a small but determined army, launching one of the most audacious campaigns in history. The Persian military, once feared across continents, now struggled with coordination, outdated tactics, and internal division. At the Battle of Issus and later Gaugamela, Alexander's forces outmaneuvered and overwhelmed much larger Persian armies. Darius III, the reigning king, fled both times, and in doing so lost not just battles but legitimacy. City after city fell to Alexander, but he wasn't just conquering, he was absorbing. In Persepolis, he famously burned the palaces, in a gesture of both revenge and symbolism, claiming he was avenging the earlier Persian sack of Athens. Yet he also adopted Persian customs, wore Persian dress, and married into Persian nobility. It was conquest, yes, but also transformation. Alexander saw himself as more than a Macedonian king. He was now the successor to Darius, the new great king, When Darius III was finally killed by one of his own satraps, Alexander pursued and punished the traitor, not out of loyalty but to claim the crown legitimately. He wasn't replacing Persia, he was claiming it. The Achaemenid Empire officially ended not with a final stand, but with a betrayal, a beheading, and a new king who came from the west. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his empire fractured, but Persia's legacy didn't vanish. The lands once ruled by the Achaemenids became the stage for new powers. The Seleucid Empire, which tried to maintain Macedonian control, and later the Parthians, who rose from within the Iranian plateau to reclaim their autonomy. Though different in form, the Parthians revived many Achaemenid practices, blending Greek, Persian, and local traditions into a new imperial identity. And while the names changed, the echo of Persia's greatness persisted. The roads Cyrus built were still used. The satrapal system Darius invented continued to inspire. Even Roman and Byzantine emperors, centuries later, would borrow ideas from Persian statecraft. Persia had fallen, yes, but it had shaped the very idea of empire. The end of Achaemenid rule wasn't just the fall of a dynasty, it was the passing of a world order. But its influence endured in every culture it touched, every rebel it suppressed, every trade route it carved. Which brings us to our final chapter, not of conquest, but of legacy. The Persian Empire may have fallen, but its blueprint outlived its borders. What Cyrus, Darius, and their successors built wasn't just a kingdom, it was a prototype for governance, culture, and diplomacy that echoed through millennia. In many ways, Persia invented the empire as we know it. Consider administration. Darius's satrapal system, with its balance of central authority and regional autonomy, was so effective that future empires, from the Romans to the Ottomans, borrowed its essence. Even the idea of a bureaucratic civil service, standardized taxation, and codified laws owe roots to Persian innovations. The empire functioned like a machine, and that model became the foundation for complex states across history. In religion, Persia left its mark through Zoroastrianism, concepts like a cosmic battle between good and evil, the judgment of souls, and even the idea of a messiah influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. While Zoroastrianism never became a global faith, its philosophical DNA spread far beyond Iran's borders. Culturally, Persia was a pioneer in multiculturalism. Rather than enforce a single language or belief system, it allowed, even encouraged, diversity. Egyptian, Babylonian, Greek, and Indian influences all found a place within Persian art and society. This mosaic approach proved not just tolerant but stable. In an age of empire built on force, Persia built on respect. Even its failures taught lessons. The wars with Greece, the internal rebellions, and the eventual fall to Alexander became cautionary tales about overreach, hubris, and the importance of adaptability. The Achaemenids built fast, but sometimes too wide. They ruled with grace, but at times too loosely. These lessons weren't lost on future leaders, but perhaps Persia's greatest legacy is narrative. It shaped how the East and West saw each other. To the Greeks, Persia was both enemy and muse, feared for its power, admired for its elegance. To the East, Persia was a beacon of order, justice, and imperial ambition. In every historical retelling, it looms large, not just as a land, but as a civilizational force. So when we study the Persian Empire, we aren't just looking at ruins or reading ancient names. We're tracing the lines of our modern world, in how we govern, how we think, and how we remember. It was more than an empire. It was an idea, one that never truly died.